Chapter 1: A Stranger's Return. The village of Oduma lay nestled between the great Njaba River and the whispering Ohamiri forest, where trees swayed like elders murmuring ancient secrets. The people lived simply, farmers tending to their yams, fishermen casting nets at dawn, and traders shouting prices at the bustling market square. Life was steady, predictable. Until the day Obiora returned. No one had seen him in 7 years. He had left Oduma a poor, restless young man, chasing wealth in the city. But the man who returned was not the same boy who once begged for palm wine at the tavern. He rode into the village in a horse-drawn carriage, dressed in fine silk wrappers that shimmered under the sun. His golden anklets jingled as he walked, and his fingers sparkled with heavy rings. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. "How did he become so rich?" one woman murmured. "Did he find favor with the gods?" a man wondered. "Or did he make a pact with something else?" an elder said darkly. But doubts were quickly drowned by awe. Obiora showered the people with gifts, golden bracelets, embroidered clothes, and baskets overflowing with money cowries and shiny coins. He paid off debts for widows, bought drinks for the elders, and gave the children sweets wrapped in foreign paper. And then, he set his eyes on the women of Oduma. As the days passed, Obiora's presence in Oduma grew like a shadow stretching over the village. He moved with the air of a king, his wealth whispering promises that made even the cautious lower their guard. But it was the women who drank deepest from his river of riches. Obiora had a way of speaking that made them feel like queens. He called them daughters of the moon, whispered sweet words of admiration and fortune, and promised a life far beyond the simplicity of Oduma. He gifted them silk wrappers that shimmered like water, golden earrings that caught the sun, and perfumes that smelled of distant lands. Then, one fateful evening, he set his sights on Nkem. Nkem was known for her beauty, her skin dark like roasted cocoa, her eyes sharp as an eagle's. She was the daughter of Ozoemena, the palm wine tapper, and had many suitors, but none had wealth like Obiora. When he approached her by the river, where she had gone to fetch water, he smiled and handed her a golden comb, its handle carved with the image of a coiled serpent. "A gift for the most beautiful flower in Oduma," he said, his voice smooth as palm oil. Nkem hesitated, but the gift was too fine to refuse. She accepted it, and with that one act, she unknowingly sealed her fate. That night, Obiora invited her to his mansion. And by the time the first rooster crowed, Nkem was never seen again. The sun rose over Oduma, its golden rays stretching across the thatched rooftops and winding footpaths. Women bustled in the marketplace, men prepared for a day's labor, and children chased each other around the village square. But one voice was missing. Nkem's. Her mother, Mama Ozoemena, stood outside their hut, her brows furrowed with worry. Nkem had not returned from Obiora's mansion. At first, Mama Ozoemena told herself that perhaps her daughter had stayed late, enjoying the riches she had been offered. But as the hours passed, an unease slithered into her heart like a cold snake. By mid-morning, she walked to Obiora's mansion, a towering structure built of red clay and black stones, standing at the very edge of the village. The gate was guarded by 2 large bronze statues of warriors, their hollow eyes staring out into nothingness. Mama Ozoemena knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing Obiora, dressed in a deep red wrapper embroidered with golden patterns. He smiled warmly, his teeth gleaming in the sunlight. "Ah, Mama Ozoemena, what a pleasure to see you." His voice was rich and soothing, like the river after heavy rainfall. "Where is my daughter?" she asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Obiora's smile widened. "She left early this morning. She said she wanted to fetch water before the sun rose too high." Mama Ozoemena frowned. That was strange, Nkem had never fetched water at dawn. Something was not right. Mama Ozoemena stood at Obiora's doorstep, her heart pounding like the village drum during a festival. Nkem had never been one to leave home without a word, let alone disappear without a trace. "Are you certain she left?" she pressed, searching Obiora's face for any flicker of unease. Obiora chuckled, his voice smooth as fresh palm wine. "Mama, do you not trust your own daughter?" She left of her own will. Perhaps she is visiting a friend. Something about his tone chilled her bones. She turned and walked away, her mind racing. She asked the women at the river, none had seen Kem. She visited her daughter's closest friends, none had spoken to her. By midday, worry had gripped the village like a storm cloud, heavy and threatening to burst. By evening, a search party was formed. Men with lanterns combed the forest paths, calling Kem's name. Women whispered prayers, clutching charms against their chests. But as the night stretched on, hope began to wither. And deep within the Ohamiri forest, where the trees whispered secrets, a golden comb lay half buried in the soil, its serpent handle gleaming under the moonlight. Nkem was nowhere to be found. The disappearance of Nkem cast a dark shadow over Oduma. For days, the villagers searched through the forests, along the riverbanks, even in abandoned farmlands. But Nkem was nowhere to be found. Then, on the seventh day, a stranger arrived in the village. He was an old man, his back slightly bent with age, his eyes milky with wisdom. He wore a simple white wrapper, and in his right hand, he held a wooden staff carved with strange symbols. His name was Meduka, a prophet who traveled from village to village, delivering messages from the gods. The villagers gathered in the marketplace, eager to hear his words. Oduma. Meduka called, his voice carrying like the wind. You live in a time of deception. A man walks among you, covered in gold but soaked in blood. He brings gifts, but they come at a terrible price. Beware, daughters of Oduma, for the wealth of blood is upon you. A hush fell over the crowd. Some women shivered at his words. Some men glanced at Obiora, who stood in the distance, his arms folded, his face unreadable. Others laughed, shaking their heads. Who is this mad old man? Someone scoffed. Why should we fear a man who only brings wealth? Another said. Obiora smiled, stepping forward. Good prophet, your words are wise, but surely you do not mean me. I have done nothing but bless Oduma with riches. Or do you mean to say the gods despise prosperity? The people murmured in agreement. Meduka's gaze lingered on Obiora for a long moment, his eyes filled with something ancient and knowing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving only his warning behind. The villagers soon forgot him. But the spirits did not. 3 days after Prophet Meduka's warning, the village of Oduma tried to return to normal. The marketplace was lively, the farms were busy, and laughter once again floated through the air. The villagers convinced themselves that Nkem had simply run away, or had been taken by wild spirits, a tale easier to accept than the idea that one of their own had a hand in her disappearance. But the river told a different story. At dawn, 2 fishermen, Ikin and Duru, paddled their canoe along the Njaba River, setting their traps as they had done for years. The morning mist curled above the water, and the trees along the banks rustled in the breeze. Then, Duru saw it first, something floating between the lily pads. Ikin, look, he whispered, pointing ahead. A piece of cloth drifted on the water's surface, caught between the branches of a fallen tree. As they drew closer, the truth sent a shiver down their spines. It wasn't just cloth. It was a dress. And it belonged to Nkem. The fishermen exchanged uneasy glances before pulling it into the boat. It was soaked, its vibrant colors faded, and the scent of the river clung to it. There was no sign of a body, but the presence of the dress was enough to shake them. By noon, the entire village had gathered by the riverbank. Nkem's mother collapsed to the ground, wailing. The elders muttered amongst themselves, their once dismissed fears creeping back like ghosts from the past. What if the prophet was right? Someone whispered. Obiora stood among them, his face unreadable. But for the first time since his return, a hint of something dark flickered in his eyes. The river had spoken. And the village could not longer ignore the whispers of the spirits. The discovery of Nkem's dress by the river sent ripples of fear through Oduma. The women whispered, the men frowned, and the elders sat in silence, their minds heavy with unspoken thoughts. Mama Ozoemina refused to eat, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She clutched her daughter's dress, rocking back and forth as the wails of mourning filled her hut. The village was divided, some believed Nkem had drowned, others were not so sure. "But where is her body?" the palm wine tapper, Okonkwo, asked at the village square. "If she drowned, the river would have returned her by now," another man agreed. Suspicion grew like a dark cloud before a storm, and one name sat at the center of it, Obiora. Yet, no one dared to speak it aloud. Instead, the women continued to accept his gifts, their eyes blinded by golden bangles and shimmering fabrics. He was still the most eligible bachelor, and his mansion stood like a fortress of wealth at the village's edge. But not everyone was fooled. In the shadows, Ezen, Nkem's childhood friend, watched Obiora closely. Something in her spirit twisted with unease whenever she saw him. She had seen the way he smiled, how his eyes lingered on women like a hunter studying prey. And as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting long shadows over Oduma, Ezen made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth. Even if it killed her. The moon hung high over Oduma, bathing the village in silver light. The air was still, yet a silent tension lurked beneath the night's beauty. Inside his grand mansion, Obiora sat in his lavishly decorated chamber, running his fingers over a small, blood-red pouch. He muttered strange words under his breath, his lips curving into a satisfied smile. Somewhere in the shadows, something watched him. Meanwhile, in the heart of the village, another young woman prepared for a visit she would never return from. Her name was Olido, and she was as proud as she was beautiful. With her smooth, dark skin and sharp cheekbones, she was admired by men and envied by women. Unlike Nkem, she did not hesitate when Obiora's messenger arrived at her hut that evening. "The great Obiora invites you to a feast at his mansion," the young boy announced, his voice filled with admiration. Olido smiled, adjusting the golden bangles Obiora had gifted her days before. "Tell him I will be there." Ignoring her mother's warning and the whispers of Nkem's disappearance, she dressed in her finest wrapper, tied her hair in a neat bun, and set off towards Obiora's mansion. She did not know that the path she walked was lined with unseen spirits. She did not know that, by dawn, her name would be added to the village's growing whispers of fear. And she did not know that the men she admired had already chosen the price her life would pay. Olido arrived at Obiora's mansion with a smile on her lips and excitement in her heart. The golden lanterns lining the compound flickered in the night breeze, casting eerie shadows on the tall red walls. Obiora welcomed her with open arms, his voice warm and inviting. "Ah, the jewel of Oduma has arrived." His eyes held the same charm that had fooled so many before. Inside, a grand feast awaited, platters of roasted meat, bowls of steaming yam porridge, and calabashes of sweet palm wine sat on the table. A musician played the udu drum softly in the background, adding to the illusion of peace. Olido laughed, drank, and indulged in the luxury that surrounded her. She barely noticed when the servants withdrew, one by one, until only she and Obiora remained. The air changed. "You must be the luckiest woman in Oduma," Obiora said smoothly, pouring her another drink. Olido giggled. "Why do you say that?" "Because the gods have chosen you for something great," he whispered. Before she could ask what he meant, the room suddenly felt colder. A strange heaviness settled in the air, making it hard to breathe. Then, the lights flickered. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own, twisting into dark figures with hollow eyes. Olido's laughter faded. "Obiora, what is this?" Obiora only smiled. A slow, knowing smile. And by the time the last lantern burned out, Olido was never seen again. The morning sun rose over Oduma, but its warmth did not reach the hearts of its people. Another daughter was missing. Olido's mother, Mama Ifioma, woke early, expecting to hear her daughter's voice outside, perhaps humming a song as she prepared for the day. But the hut was silent. As the hours passed, worry clawed at her chest. She walked to the marketplace, asking everyone she saw, "Have you seen Olido?" Nobody had. By midday, the village was buzzing with hushed conversations. First Nkem, now Olido. The same search party that had scoured the forests for Nkem gathered once again, their faces grim. The men split into groups, some went to the river, some to the farmlands, others to the dense Ohamiri forest, where the spirits were said to roam. But as before, there was no sign of her. Then, as the sun began to set, a young boy named Chigazi came running from the outskirts of the village, his face pale with fear. "I saw something," he cried, panting heavily. "By the big Irako tree near Obiora's compound." The villagers rushed to the spot, led by Chigazi's shaking hands. And there, half buried in the dirt, was a single golden bangle, the very one Olito had worn the night before. The people stared at it in silence, their eyes filled with the unspoken truth. Obiora stood at his mansion's gate, watching from a distance. He did not speak. He did not need to. For the first time, fear truly settled in the hearts of Oduma. The discovery of Olito's golden bangle near Obiora's compound sent waves of unease through Oduma. The whispers that had once been dismissed as paranoia now spread like wildfire. 2 women have vanished, and both were last seen with Obiora. Mama Ifioma wept in the village square, her voice raw with grief. The elders convened at the Irako tree, their faces dark with worry. Chief Okafor, the oldest among them, spoke first. "This is no longer a coincidence. The gods are warning us." But Obiora was powerful. His wealth had fed their children, clothed their women, and filled their calabashes with wine. "Can we really accuse him?" one elder muttered. The others hesitated. To challenge a man of means was to invite trouble. Yet, how many more women would disappear before they admitted the truth? In the shadows, Ezen, Nkem's best friend, listened to their discussion. Her fists clenched. She had known from the moment Nkem disappeared that something was terribly wrong. "If the elders will not act," she thought, "then I will." And with that silent vow, she turned toward Obiora's mansion, determined to uncover what lurked behind its walls. She had no idea what horror awaited her. Ezen moved through the village with careful steps, her heart pounding like the talking drum during a festival. Night had fallen over Oduma, and most of the villagers had retreated to their homes, locking their doors early. Fear had settled like a heavy mist, and no one wanted to be the next to disappear. But Ezen refused to be afraid. She had loved Nkem like a sister, and now Olito was gone too. If the elders would not act, she would find out the truth herself. With only the moon to guide her, she approached Obiora's mansion, its tall red walls rising like a fortress against the night sky. The gate was slightly open, as if waiting for someone to enter. A shiver ran down her spine. She stepped inside, her bare feet barely making a sound on the stone floor. The courtyard was eerily quiet, the lanterns casting long, flickering shadows. She crept along the edge of the compound, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Then, she heard it, a low, murmuring sound. It was coming from the main hall. Heart hammering, she pressed herself against the wall and peeked through a narrow opening. What she saw nearly made her gasp aloud. Obiora stood in the center of the room, dressed in a blood-red wrapper, his hands raised toward an ancient wooden idol. The statue had empty eyes and a mouth curved in a twisted grin. Before it on the floor lay a bowl filled with dark liquid, too thick to be palm wine. Ezen covered her mouth, stepping back slowly. She had seen enough. She turned to leave, but then a cold hand gripped her wrist. She was not alone. Ezen's breath caught in her throat as the cold hand tightened around her wrist. Fear crawled up her spine like a serpent, but she fought the urge to scream. Slowly, she turned her head. A tall, dark figure loomed over her, its face hidden in the shadows. Its grip was strong, too strong for a mere servant. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The figure did not answer. Instead, it pulled her forward, dragging her toward the main hall, toward Obiora. Ezen struggled, but the grip only tightened. Her mind raced. Had Obiora seen her? Did he know she had witnessed his ritual? As they crossed into the dimly lit hall, the air became thick, suffocating, charged with something unnatural. The wooden idol stood like a silent guardian, watching as Obiora turned toward her. His smile was slow, knowing. Too calm. Ezin, he said, his voice like silk over steel. I was wondering when you would come. Her blood ran cold. He had been expecting her. She had walked straight into his trap. Ezin's heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand tall. She would not let Obiora see her fear. Let me go, she demanded, yanking her wrist free from the grip of the shadowy figure. Now that she could see him clearly, she recognized him, Ikenna, Obiora's most trusted servant. His empty gaze sent shivers down her spine. Obiora chuckled, stepping closer. The lantern light flickered across his smooth, dark skin, highlighting the golden rings on his fingers. You are brave, Ezin. But bravery is often the road to an early grave. Ezin's fists clenched. Where is Nkam? Where is Olido? For a moment, Obiora simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he walked to the wooden idol and placed his hand on its head. The gods require sacrifice, he said softly, tracing the carvings on the idol's face. Wealth does not come without blood, and the gods must be fed. Ezin staggered back, horror slamming into her chest. You killed them. Obiora turned, smiling. No, my dear. The gods claimed what was offered. I simply facilitated their hunger. The air in the room grew colder. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift, their shapes stretching unnaturally. Ezin's pulse raced. She had to get out. Obiora stepped toward her. I admire your courage, Ezin. But courage cannot save you now. She spun around and bolted for the door. Stop her. Obiora's voice echoed through the chamber, but Ezin was already racing through the courtyard, her bare feet slamming against the stone floor. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she stopped, she knew she would never leave that mansion alive. Ezin ran like the wind, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she raced through the dark courtyard. Behind her, she heard the pounding of footsteps. Ikenna was chasing her. Catch her. Obiora's voice rang through the night, filled with cold amusement. Ezin's heart pounded. The gates were just ahead, slightly open, just as she had found them. If she could reach them before Ikenna. But as she lunged forward, a heavy hand grabbed her shoulder, yanking her backward with terrifying force. She crashed to the ground, her elbow scraping against the rough stone. Pain shot through her arm, but she barely noticed. She had no time for pain. Ikenna loomed over her, his dark eyes empty of mercy. You shouldn't have come here, he murmured, reaching for her again. Ezin acted on pure instinct. She grabbed a loose stone from the ground and swung it with all her strength. The rock cracked against Ikenna's temple with a sickening thud. He staggered, eyes wide with shock before crumpling to the ground. For a split second, everything was silent. Then Ezin scrambled to her feet and sprinted through the gates. She ran through the empty village streets, her mind racing as fast as her feet. She had seen too much. She knew the truth now. But as she reached the safety of her family's hut, she realized something chilling. Obiora had let her go. And that meant he was not afraid. Not of her. Not of anyone. Not yet. Ezin collapsed inside her mother's hut, her chest heaving, sweat dripping from her brow. She barely noticed her mother, Mama Chidima, rushing toward her in alarm. Ezin. What happened? Why do you look like you have seen a ghost? Ezin's hands trembled as she held onto her mother for support. Not a ghost, Mama. A devil. The words hung heavy between them. Mama Chidima's face tightened with fear. What do you mean? Ezin looked around, making sure no one else was listening. Then, in a low, urgent whisper, she told her mother everything, the strange ritual, the wooden idol, the bowl of blood, Obiora's chilling confession. By the time she finished, Mama Chidima's hands were shaking. Chinik, she whispered. I always knew something was not right with that man. And the village refused to listen to the prophet's warning. Ezin swallowed hard. We cannot stay silent, Mama. The village must know. But Mama Chidima grabbed her hand tightly. And if they do? Do you think Obiora will let you live after this? He is powerful, Ezin. He walks with the spirits of darkness. A shiver crawled down Ezin's spine. She knew her mother was right. Obiora had let her go for a reason. But was it because he thought she would stay quiet? Or because he already knew what he would do to silence her? Outside, the wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets to the night. Ezin was no longer just a witness. She was a threat. And threats did not live long in Oduma. That night, Ezin lay awake, her mind restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Obiora's eerie smile, the flickering shadows of his ritual, the blood-filled bowl. Sleep would not come. She was no longer safe. Before dawn, she made a decision. She needed to find Prophet Maduka. The old prophet had warned the village before Nkem disappeared, but no one had listened. Now, with Olido gone and the truth revealed, Ezin knew she had to seek him out before it was too late. As the first light of morning touched Oduma, she wrapped herself in a shawl and slipped out of the hut, moving quickly and quietly through the empty streets. She found Prophet Maduka outside his shrine, seated under an ancient baobab tree. His white beard gleamed in the early sun, and his piercing eyes met hers as if he had been expecting her. "You have seen the darkness, child," he said before she could even speak. Ezin shivered. "It is worse than we imagined, Prophet. Obiora has made a pact with the gods of blood," Maduka finished solemnly. "I warned them, but greed deafens the ears of fools." Ezin knelt before him, desperation in her voice. "Tell me, Prophet. How can we stop him?" The old man sighed, his gaze heavy. "Obiora's wealth is built on the blood of the innocent. To end his reign, he must be stripped of his power. But be warned, child, he knows you have seen the truth. And a man who feeds the gods with blood does not let his prey escape so easily." Ezin's blood ran cold. She was not just a witness. She was now his next target. Ezin felt a chill crawl up her spine as Prophet Maduka's words sank in. She had suspected it, Obiora would come for her. But hearing it spoken aloud made it feel even more real, more terrifying. "What do I do?" she whispered. The old prophet studied her for a long moment. Then, in a low, grave voice, he said, "You must leave Oduma before nightfall." Ezin's eyes widened. "Leave? But if you stay, you will not see another sunrise." His words hit her like a spear to the chest. She had never considered leaving Oduma, her home, her family, the place where she had grown up. But now, the village that had once been her safe haven had turned into a hunting ground. And she was the prey. Tears stung her eyes. What about the others? Nkem, Olido, all the women Obiora has taken. If I leave, who will stop him? Prophet Maduka sighed. The gods are watching, child. Justice will come, but you must live to see it. If you stay, you will only add your blood to his wealth. Ezin's stomach twisted with fear and frustration. She had risked her life to uncover the truth, and now she was being told to run. But deep down, she knew Maduka was right. Obiora was too powerful. The elders feared him, the village depended on his wealth, and the spirits themselves seemed to guard his secret. If she stayed, he would make sure she never spoke again. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees, and Maduka's eyes darkened. "He knows you are here." Ezin's heart slammed against her ribs. It was time to decide, fight or flee. But one thing was certain. By nightfall, Obiora would come for her. Ezin's mind raced as Prophet Maduka's warning echoed in her ears. Obiora knew where she was. She had no time to waste. "Go now," the prophet urged, his voice firm. "Take only what you need and run before the sun sets." Ezin nodded, her heart pounding. She turned and hurried back toward her mother's hut, keeping to the narrow paths between the mud houses, avoiding the open streets. But even as she moved, she felt it, a presence watching her. She quickened her pace. The village seemed too quiet, too still. Had Obiora already sent his men after her? By the time she reached her mother's hut, her breath was shallow with panic. Mama Chidima was waiting at the door, her face tight with worry. Ezin, what did the prophet say? I have to leave. Tonight. Her mother staggered back, clutching her chest. Leave? But why? Ezin's throat tightened. Mama, Obiora knows I saw him. If I stay, he will kill me. Mama Chidima's eyes filled with tears, but she did not argue. Instead, she turned, rushed inside, and began gathering a small bundle of food and clothing. Take this, she whispered, pressing a leather pouch into Ezin's hands. It is not much, but it will help you survive. Ezin hugged her mother tightly, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't want to go, but staying meant death. As she pulled away, a loud knock echoed at the door. Both women froze. A slow, deep voice followed. Ezin. I know you are inside. Come out. Obiora. Ezin's blood turned to ice. He had come for her. Ezin's breath caught in her throat. The voice outside was calm, almost gentle, but she knew better. Obiora was a man who killed with a smile. Mama Chidima gripped her daughter's arm, her eyes wide with fear. You must go. Now. The knock came again, louder, firmer. Do not make me ask again, Ezin. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The back entrance. It was the only way out. Mama Chidima moved quickly, lifting a woven mat that covered a small opening at the back of the hut. It was barely large enough for Ezin to squeeze through. Go, my daughter, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I will stall him. Ezin hesitated, her eyes burning. Mama, I. Go, her mother urged, pushing her toward the escape. With one last glance at the door, where Obiora's shadow loomed, Ezin swallowed her fear, and slipped through the small opening. The cool night air hit her skin, but she did not stop to breathe. She ran. Behind her, she heard the door creak open. Obiora had stepped inside. Where is she? His voice was smooth, patient. Mama Chidima did not answer. Ezin forced herself not to stop, not to cry. She knew what her mother was risking to buy her time. She disappeared into the night, a hunted woman, with only one thought in her mind. She had to survive. If you like my stories, follow, share, subscribe, like and comment for the next part as the story gets interestingly hot.